Thanks for inviting me to present today.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Good to come back again. I can't have been that bad last time around if you invited me back again, so that's always a good sign.
Right.
So yeah, I'm gonna talk today about the topic, which is about cost benefit analysis. So my specialist world of safety is all around slips, trips, and falls, and the first step often of us going on that journey with a client is doing a slip test, and you'd be surprised how often people seemingly don't want to spend £500 to get a test done, but actually the benefit of that information and that data can be quite compelling. So got a few slides which I'll walk you through, and then I'm happy to take some questions at the end as well.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
It's all working. There we go. Right, so a bit about me. I'm the founder of a business called Slip Safety Services. We work in the safety and risk management field, primarily involved in the reduction of slipping accidents in busy public buildings. Typically, our clients see a 50% or greater reduction in accidents after we've worked with them. And over the last 3 years, that's led to over 3,000 hospital admissions being prevented, stopping about £30 million of claims. So that'll give you a bit of a clue as to some of the cost benefit analysis here. Currently working on some partnerships with insurance companies. We're seeking to double the impact that we're making in 2021. Fundamentally, I believe that proactive safety and risk management drives performance in business. So I've come from a business consultancy background, but I've suffered a catastrophic accident, nothing like James's. I was run over by a car when I was standing on a pavement. Nothing could have been done by me to prevent that, but I do know what it's like to be the victim of an unforeseen accident. And if you add those two things together, you know, that's what makes me really passionate about trying to help people to better run their businesses through improved safety and risk management. And I've got a model called Safety and Risk Success, which is an acronym. And the third letter of that, the first C, is actually calculate your total cost of risk. So that's one of the steps in the process that I recommend to people. A key step is to calculate your total cost of risk. So that fits perfectly in with this topic today. In order to invest in managing your safety and risk better, you really need to know what your current costs are, because otherwise you can't put together a proper return on investment calculation. Just for your information, the other steps are there. So set quantifiable inputs and outputs, understand root causes, avoid the superficial, calculate your total cost of risk, create a performance flywheel, engage with your partners, spell out the consequences, and start quickly, improve gradually, but perfect never. So that's my process. In terms of a bit of additional just background, I work with a number of insurers, brokers, law firms, and blue chip clients like CBRE. I've co-authored industry guidance on slips, and I'm a member of the UK Slip Resistance Group. And a few examples of clients that we've helped in various sectors with some quite good outcomes when it comes to the reduction of slipping accidents. And as James said earlier, typically that's the biggest cause of accident and claim in most sectors. So 2020, obviously a year like we've never had before, but one of the good things that's happened, one of the few good things that's happened, I suppose, is that safety and risk has come more to the forefront. So people are more attuned to safety and more attuned to risk than they were before. So to some extent, long may that continue. And overarching the COVID crisis, there are a handful of other trends that are really driving what's happening in the world of safety and risk at the moment as well. Demographics being a big one. Certainly, if you look at the UK, for example, the population is getting a lot older, and the older you are, obviously, the more susceptible you are to a bad injury if you slip and break your wrist or break your hip or something like that. If you're 20, you fall over and you dust yourself off and get up and crack on. If you're 70, you end up in hospital, and that leads to all sorts of health issues. And there's some interesting stuff around what's going to be happening in the world after the recession, or during the recession, should I say. Typically, insurance claim volumes rise quite significantly in periods of recession. So thinking about slips, I'm confronted on a pretty much a daily basis with a few problems of getting my message through to people. So the first one is that there's this kind of belief that falls are funny. So if you Google slip accident and you look at videos, what you're going to find is videos of people sort of slipping on ice and kind of humorous things like that, not videos of serious accidents and the consequences of those accidents. The other thing is that this isn't a really sexy topic, to say the least. So, you know, cyber security and things like that, that's quite a sexy topic when it comes to risk management. So there's that challenge, and there's this kind of belief that these are inevitable, you know, they're always going to happen, you can't stop them, you just have to put up with them. So that produces this kind of lackadaisical, standoffish approach. But the biggest problem, I would say, is that there's a misconception that these accidents aren't that expensive, and that people just kind of think, well, I've got my insurance and that covers me for that anyway, so it doesn't matter. And that's the really big problem here. People don't understand the true consequences, financial, human costs, but also what happens in terms of insurance and stuff going forward. They don't. People, you know, do people really understand the true cost of accidents and risks? I would suggest that most people don't. So let's look at slips then. In the UK, a slip happens in the workplace every 3 minutes. 95% of serious slips lead to a broken bone, so quite serious accidents. Every year, 300,000 people go to A&E, accidents and emergency, after a slip, which is the biggest cause of admission. And that results in 1.5 million NHS bed days. So that's a huge cost to the UK just on those bed days, because every bed day is, I think it's about 600 quid. And we work with AXA, a big multinational insurer. And again, in the UK, they spend 80 million a year on slip accident insurance claim costs. They spend another 15 million or something like that on trips. So slips and trips is almost 100 million pounds just for AXA every year. And those numbers are pretty much flat year after year after year. But, and this goes for not just slips, trips and falls, but other types of accidents as well, we've got to get over this fallacy that our insurance will cover it, because we have, yes, we have insured costs that our insurance will cover, but actually we have a huge raft of uninsured costs that our insurance won't cover us for. And these are what's actually really driving the costs here when we talk about financial costs. You know, that's forgetting all of the human costs that we can talk about too. Now, the HSE estimates that the uninsured costs are between £8 and £36 for every pound of insured costs. So if you've got an insurance claim of £10, you've got hidden costs or uninsured costs of between £80 and £360. Now, we did a survey a couple of years ago on LinkedIn, and we got 150 odd health and safety leaders, and we got a slightly tighter grouping, but it was still 10 to 12 times. So, you know, that's a significant cost, whichever way you look at it. 10 to 12 times every insurance claim pound is being paid out in other ways, and those are coming directly from the bottom line. So in terms of the overall cost then in the UK of slips, so bearing in mind AXA is a big insurer around the world, but by no means do they monopolise the market. They've got less than 10% of the UK market. So that equates to over £1 billion of insured costs from slips, but using our banding of 10 to 12 times, that means we're looking at £11 billion plus of total costs from slips as a potential market size. And that's just one type of accident, albeit the most frequent. Looking at it from a company perspective, one of the ways that I try to get this through to people is to say, well, look, if you're selling Big Macs, if you're McDonald's, how many Big Macs do you need to sell, bearing in mind your margins, to make £10,000 of profit to cover the cost of one claim? And in McDonald's case, they've got to sell almost 20,000 Big Macs to make £10,000 of profit. And this is a good tactic or strategy that you guys could potentially use in your businesses as well, or with clients, to kind of try to get into their minds the cost of these kinds of accidents. So try and put it in terms that they understand. So if you're a supermarket like Tesco, how many bunches of bananas do you need to sell to make £10,000? Almost $250,000. That's a hell of a lot of bananas. And from the bottom line perspective of that business, it would be much easier for them to avoid one £10,000 insurance claim than it would arguably to sell 250,000 bunches of bananas, but the net effect would be the same. So you've really got to know your total cost of risk, and this, I've framed this from the perspective of slips, and the numbers that I'm giving are around slips, but actually this is exactly the same whatever business you're in, whatever type of accident, whatever type of risk you're looking to address. You've got to understand your total cost of risk. So that's all of the losses here, the direct costs, the risk transfer costs, so in other words, your insurance premium and your internal costs, and all of that adds up into a significant pot of money. Now let's go back to those same three businesses, or let's just think about McDonald's. The 20,000 Big Macs to cover the £10,000 cost is one thing, but when you start to look at the true cost of the slips, you add in all of those uninsured costs, you've now got to sell 250,000 Big Macs to make your £135,000 of profit. Now that's significant, whichever way you look at it. You've got to sell 3.2 million bunches of bananas to make £135,000 of net profit if you're Tesco. So again, you've got to know these numbers, because if you don't know these numbers, then you can't make these calculations and you can't put across this argument. But if you start thinking about, if you're McDonald's, well, would we spend £500 on a slip test versus having to sell 250,000 Big Macs? I'm sure they would. So it's thinking about how to frame these points. So if you look at it in that context, a £500 slip test seems like a pretty good idea. I think you'll agree. So a bit of a lesson there in terms of just how I would approach and how I have approached the selling, in inverted commas, of risk management and thinking about safety interventions, particularly in the context of doing a test, because if you've got a potential issue with slips, you can't really address that without doing a slip test first, I would suggest. Just a few things in terms of me. As mentioned, pretty active on LinkedIn, so I'd love for you to connect with me on there, where I do stuff pretty much every day. I've got a podcast as well, which is going out every week, called the Safety and Risk Success Podcast. And I'm always looking for guests to share their stories on there. Jonathan's done, who's speaking soon, has done an episode, and James and I have spoken about him doing an episode as well. And I've also got a slip safety scorecard. So this is a digital diagnostic tool where you can log on, answer a few questions. It takes about 5 minutes. It's about 40 questions, but it's kind of yes, no, very quick. And this will give you a score based on how you're performing against the 6 factors that cause a slip, and it'll give you some advice on what you can do to reduce the risk of slips in your buildings. And why is this important? You know, why do we need to know this? Why do we need to go on this journey of improving safety and risk? Just a quick story, which I did share when I last appeared as well, but if in case anybody wasn't there, working with a large health club operator with over 100 sites and with swimming pools where, of course, floors get wet and therefore slips are more likely to happen than in environments that are dry. We managed to improve their performance and reduce the number of insurance claims they were getting from, broadly speaking, 1 a week to 1 a month. So it's about an 85% reduction. Well, what did that do to them? Well, of course, it helped with their profitability, because that saved them a huge amount of money when it came to claims costs, but also all of those hidden costs that we had talked about. So, you know, going from 1 claim a week to 1 claim a month, multiply that by £10,000 average claim, you're looking in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. But if you multiply it by another 10 with all of the hidden costs, that's a significant saving. But it also enabled them to do other great stuff as well, because actually they can redeploy their time, and they were able and wanted to make some efforts when it comes to a particular charity that they were supporting. So they were able to allocate time and resource away from dealing with accidents and claims into doing some good in the world. And that, to me, is really what it's all about. So if anybody can take a lesson from this, I think it's really get to know your numbers just like you would in any business, and use those numbers to your advantage. Use them to make sensible investment decisions, such as investing in a slip test for a few £100s, which can save you hundreds of thousands of pounds of insured and uninsured costs. Hope that's been useful, and I'm happy to take any questions.